The first thing we need to do is put in a very light outline of where we want this shadow to fall. So we're going to start this just a little ways up the cylinder. So around, let's say right there, or even a little bit lower. So just slightly above where that ellipse ended. And then we're going to start it from over here, so just the very corner. And I'm going to take this out at an angle and have this angle match it. And then we can just fade it out. If you've got room, maybe it ends in kind of a curve. But if you don't have room, we can just fade that out. All right. We don't want our line to be really heavy. Can you guys see that though? I can make it a little darker if I need to, but we don't want the If it's possible, you can make it kind of flatten a little bit, but not so much you can do. All right. As I'm getting ready here, if your lines are a little bit sketchy, you can kind of erase down to the ones that you know you want to have. We don't want to make these darker. All right, so we're just getting ready. And you can really do this as you shade. So as we're shading, you're going to be going little bit by little bit, and you're going to be finding these lines anyway. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to take my HB pencil, so my lighter pencil, and I'm going to start with the edge of my cylinder here and shade in lightly. So this will be our area that's the light gray. So let's say a 4. And we're going to, so this is where our reflected light comes in. So we're on the opposite side from the light source. Our light source is over here, opposite the shadow. As you're going up and down this line, again, we don't want this line to stand out, but this is a good opportunity to make that edge clear. Then you just want to make sure you shade out from that edge. You never want that line to look separate. And we can go ahead and we can shade down to the bottom here. So when we get to the bottom, again, we're starting from that line of the ellipse and we're shading in. So if you need to clean up that line, and clean that up. So my curving lines are crossing over these, and when I say lines, like my mark making, my shading, is crossing over these horizontal mark making here. So again, creating that buffer zone. And I can continue that to about halfway across my cylinder. So I can go back and forth once I've created that buffer zone. If it's more comfortable, I can continue shading horizontally in from this edge. So I haven't done this top part yet. Oh, and that reminds me actually. There's going to be a part that we're going to come back to and add to. I was going to, but I feel like we're running short on time. Okay. So my plan was to do this as if this was an open cylinder. Are you guys up for that? Or should we make it like a flat top cylinder? And my fear is that if I vary from what I did in my example too much, it's going to get confusing. Okay, so we're gonna base it on this. So we're gonna put in this little rim of white here. Okay, so we're going to go below where we drew this line of the ellipse, just a little bit below it, and I'm adding with my HB pencil a line that just echoes it. It's just parallel to what we did. So I might have to use my little tiny eraser and clean up my initial line as I'm drawing this one down here. When I get to the edge, so look up for just a second. I'm going to erase the inside line here. So do you guys see that? How I just erased right there. And the reason I'm doing that is this line here is going to continue curving around and become this white lip underneath here. And this should be a little bit skinnier, definitely no thicker than this one here at the bottom. So I'm creating this double line where I've continued this original ellipse line and just made it curve right into this line that is going to go underneath that original ellipse line that I did. And the same thing is going to happen on the other edge. So I'm taking this one that was my original bottom line of the ellipse, and at the very edge, I erase just a little bit of it, and it curves to become the underside of this lip, which is again just mimicking, just going right underneath that top edge. So basically what started as a single line is now a double line, where we added this double here. And this was my original line. I erased just a tiny bit here to make a continuous curve that becomes this new line that's inside. That I never even catch that, and then it'll be this a little part. Absolutely. Actual. That top. Yeah. 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 Yes. You got it. Yep, that's completely right. Yep. Yep, you got it. Okay, so if anything, just make sure that it's like touches here, and these could be slightly more symmetrical, but you got the basic idea. Yeah, perfect. Yeah. If anything, if you're wondering if it's like too thick, I don't think anyone's looks too thick. You could potentially make this front one even a little bit thicker and keep this back one thinner. Do you guys see how that's happening here? This is a little bit thicker and this is just slightly thinner. And again, you know why? It's because this front part is closer than that. Okay, Chrissy? Yes. All right. Okay. So I stopped to do that because we're going to get up to that portion of the drawing with the shading. So I'm going to come back to here. And I'm going to continue my shading up the side until I get to this bottom edge. And then I'm going to stop at the bottom edge of that ellipse, the one we just added. So it's, you know, we've got two lines, we're stopping at the bottom line. So when I get there, just like I've done before, I'm going to switch directions to create that buffer zone. And bring that down. So those two areas, I can go back and forth between shading kind of in a curve side to side and shading up and down. And with those little tiny marks, they're just going to kind of blend right together. And to the best of our ability, this edge, we should have pretty smooth outer edge. We won't have this line popping out. So I'm bringing in this shading enough to kind of show, okay, this isn't going to be an outline. And in fact, this is going to get darker. So this is our reflected light over here. And we're going to have it get a little bit darker here. So if I'm looking really closely at this photo, I see this. Right here, it's a little bit lighter, and then it's actually darker a little bit over. And then it kind of fades out so that by like 3/4 of the way over, it's getting pretty light. All right. So I could, when I get a little bit farther over, I can switch to my 2B pencil. And I'm going to start from this top part. And I'm shading back and forth with this curve, blending into that area. that I did the light gray. So I can go back and forth between these two. So by doing these up and down vertical marks, my bad, we're reinforcing the plane because it is vertical like that. But we're also using these curving side to side, but not straight curving marks. And we're going to have the one run right into the other. And this is going to reinforce that curve of the plane. And this can be a little bit darker. I tend to do this at the top and at the bottom. And then I'm actually going to switch to a more horizontal mark to kind of bring those together. So I can keep going with my pencil. And I'm going up and down, but I'm getting darker. And I'm saying I can go with my pencil. I actually, again, I find this to be an area where I can actually switch to my graphite stick. I might want to actually break this. Mine's a little bit long. Break mine. Okay. So just to make sure it really fits in there and I can use the side. I find this to be a nice place to maybe also use my graphite stick in there a little bit. So our goal is to create lighter to darker to lighter again, and then we'll have a little area of some shading over here a little bit too. So, and you do need to use your pencil to create this gradation. So I'm going to then come in with a darker pencil and start to fill in kind of this gap between this darker area. So I can darken up this darker area. I'm leaving it a little bit lighter at the bottom because we're going to have this area of reflected light here before the cast shadow. So I can start using a darker pencil if I need to. Some of you just press kind of dark, so sticking with the 2B might work pretty well. But if you have a lighter touch, I'm just shifting to a darker pencil. So I'm using my ebony, but the 4B could work. The ebony is actually more like a 3B. It's actually kind of between. It does have a broader tip though. So I'm darkening it and then I'm lightening up the pressure, or you could use your lighter pencil and fill in this gap. So we want this again to go really smoothly. And then once I've kind of created this kind of band of darker area, then I'm going to start lightening the pressure again. So I'm using this up and down, maybe the side of my pencil so I can go a little faster, but still up and down. And I'm starting to lighten up. As I get to this top edge here of this cylinder, so this rim that we just put in, I will need to switch the direction, and I'm going to switch my pencil too to make sure I've got one with a really small point to get right underneath that band. And so what that is, this is on the like paper towel roll. This is really the same thing as this in miniature. So this is like a thick version of what we're drawing here. Does that make sense? So that there's a little bit of that flat top, but ours is just super tiny. So a pointy pencil. So if you have to stop, stop whenever and sharpen your pencil. That's why you've got the little pencil sharpener. So you don't always have to get up and use the big electric pencil sharpener. So I'll switch directions when I need to. And again, I'm going to bring these areas of shading together by overlapping them. I might also need to take my little eraser. I like to actually use my erasers not on the ends of my pencils for the most part. I actually like to take them off and just hold them in my hand here. I get more control. And it also kind of makes me resist that kind of automatic impulse to just sort of flip this over and start erasing like this. I have to think about it a little bit more and think, oh, okay, right. I either want one to do a large area or I want one with like a little tiny tip to it. Right. And while I've got this in my hand, I'm using my HB at this point. So this can be then a good one too, to come back over as I go down and to start going, maybe starting side to side and overlapping with this darker area, but then bringing it out and getting it lighter as I go. So again, I'm creating this slow gradation to the best of my ability, starting with my pencil. And then I can use my paper towel, my blending tool to kind of add extra smoothness, but really most of it, of that smoothness, of that blend, most of that gradual transition, gradation, if you will, most of that really does happen with my pencil. As I get down to the bottom here, I'm going to my outline was kind of looking thick again, just as I was sort of searching for where it was going to be. So I'm just using my eraser, making it more precise because a lot of this area is going to be white over here. Along the bottom of this, and I'll ask you to look up a second. So I'm turning this to the side. This is the bottom here. I've got my gradation happening here. Along this area, just from the tabletop down, I'm going to shade out and over a little bit and let it fade to white. So I'm going to ultimately be doing the same thing that I was kind of doing here, where this edge of the circle is standing out as darker against the tabletop. Same thing here. And then I can switch direction a little bit here, but I'm just letting this part fade out to white. And I can let it fade out to white here too, because once I'm ready, I am actually going to add this darker background around here too. And this is, again, this is another chance to make this edge really nice and precise. So I'm going to come down a little bit from each end, make sure that they meet up in the middle, and then I'm shading out from that. So I don't need to add really any shading to this part because I'm going to have that be defined by the negative space. If I wanted to, I could keep going with this light shading as long as I've got a difference, but I don't really think I'm going to need to. I'm kind of suggesting that already down here. So that contrast and the shading that I've done over here to make it look round can probably mean I can do less work on this side. So I am going to be taking this at your pace. I am going to be extending this shading around the cylinder. So I would take it all the way up to the top. I'll eventually be taking it up here around the top part, around the ellipse. You don't need to hurry with this. The only reason I'm kind of trying to make sure that I show you is so that you know. But if you're looking at this example, you kind of know that already. You see where we're going. We did it already around the circle. So it's the same process. When I'm doing it on this side, again, I need to make sure it really is quite dark so that it creates the contrast with that shading we did. But it's another opportunity to make sure that that edge looks like an edge that's really nice and crisp without having an outline that stands out. So you'll start at that outline that if it's still there and shade out from that and make sure that that outline, if it's still showing up, disappears into this darker shading. So if you're going pretty dark, and this, again, this is one of the darkest areas. This is going to be a 5 on your value scale. That should give you a nice, crisp edge where you have a noticeably a little bit lighter grain on the cylinder. And then I'm going to have that meet up with this shading that I was doing around the sphere. So I'll shade onto that a little bit to create that smooth transition. So they don't look like we shaded them separately. They just look like, oh yeah, that's all one background. Any transitions in the value are just going to happen little bit by little bit. So I'm either going straight up and down, or you might have at a certain point, once you had your buffer zone, we had switched to a horizontal mark. So it's vertical as I'm doing it right now because I tipped my paper, but if I'm keeping those little marks and having them overlap, you won't notice any change. They're just all going to be little tiny marks that just kind of naturally flow into one another. So my plan after this class, we should have a recording of this that it'll actually show up in your OneNote. I think I'll post it on YouTube as well, because in YouTube, you can more easily speed it up, slow it down. But if some of this went a little bit fast, because obviously, I have more experience doing this, so I might go a little faster. Plus, you're trying to watch what I'm doing and do it, right? So that takes a little longer. But tomorrow we can go ahead and we can keep working on this. And also sorry, not tomorrow. I see you again on Friday. And go back and make revisions. If you are feeling though, like, maybe you're thinking, oh man, that sphere is really a mess. I need just like a good half hour just to perfect that and do revisions. That will be the homework. So you would, if you need to bring it home, I'll make sure I hook you up with a portfolio that you can take home and protect it. But what may make more sense tomorrow is ACHBG. And then Friday is BE clubs AFCD. So if you have your free bell in there, rather than saving other homework to do, it might make sense to say, okay, I'm going to use that free bell on one of those days to come back and make my revisions if you know you've got a lot of revisions. We're not going to do the cone unless you simply have time. I'm going to come around. No, I'm not going to. I'll do this in the cleanup time. If you did not get to work on your sketchbook at all during class time and you don't have that sketchbook assignment done because you were maybe a little bit behind, you were sick, or you just tend to work very meticulously, whatever that is, touch base with me so that I know. I want you to focus on this. If you need to make revisions on this, this would be your homework. There's one part of this we haven't done. So I'm going to address this. The one part of this we really haven't touched is the inside of the cylinder. So the shadow is essentially coming from this side and getting lighter as we go over. So I would start from the inside of this lip that we added. So little bit by little bit, shading this. And then lightening up as we go. So you can either use my example, and I did then use a little bit of light shading here. So I've got white in here and a little bit of light shading coming out from the other end. But mostly we're going from dark to light, starting on the right side. So you could, if that's often the most helpful, but this is the actual example that I'm going from. That's how I know what I'm doing. So my number one advice in drawing is to look at something, and a photo reference is the best. And you don't have to just rely on what's out there on the internet. Like, you've got a digital camera on your cell phone or on your laptop. So whatever it is you want to draw, chances are, with a few exceptions, you may be able to set something up that kind of mimics that. So I'm shading slowly across this. And then on the other side, with my very light pencil, I can take that and shade in a little bit just to define that a little bit more without just relying on the outline. And I'm also probably going to get in here, I know I need to, with my very pointy eraser, and I'm going to just erase a little bit along that edge where I want it to be really white. I'm making sure that this gradation happens, and I am going to have some white in here. So if I went too far over, I can go back in, and with little marks, I can erase over if I've done too much. I can use my blending tool a little bit. So again, this blending tool has to have a really, really fine tip to it so that I can get in here without smudging my lines. And I want to make sure I don't overblend. So to make that really nice blending tool, all I'm doing is starting with a really tiny part of my paper towel, and I'm just folding it in half a whole bunch of times. It's going to be roughly rectangular shaped by the time I fold it a whole bunch. And then that very last fold, when it's kind of impossible to fold anymore after this last one, I'm just going to fold it so it kind of makes a triangle. And it doesn't, there's no wrong way to do it as long as I'm folding it like a triangle. Again, if it's dark and you don't want this to get any darker, make sure you fold it backwards and find a clean part so that I'm not using a dirty part if I need to make sure this stays light. And we don't want to overblend, but if you are at a point where maybe you want to blend a little bit on here, blend so that you're kind of blending either, again, up and down or side to side. So if you need to, I don't necessarily maybe need to all that much. So I might even like, if places are more blended, I actually made that less blendy by blending with my blending tool. So you might find that in some areas, the pencil's more effective. And we've been talking about that all along. You want this transition to happen. The other thing too is that you can use lines that curve like this to reinforce this form. So we talked about that a little bit with this sphere, and I said, oh, that's kind of hard on a sphere. It's actually quite a bit easier on a cylinder. So see how I'm using some of these curving lines? I'm just mimicking the curve of the ellipse. You see them even more on the example that I pulled from the internet. So you can really see those. So you could use those a little bit. You could even use them, create them, even with your eraser if you need to lighten up parts. All right, so if you're feeling like yours is just really not looking great, and you have a lot of revision, or you're falling behind your homework, and you need to catch up on being revision.